It all began on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the sun hits the leaves just right, and the world seems peaceful. That peace shattered the moment I saw Karen at the base of my 100-year-old oak tree, chainsaw in hand, a smug grin plastered across her face. I froze. 100 years of history, of shade, of neighborhood stories, all in the balance, and she didn't even hesitate. This tree wasn't just wood and leaves, it was a landmark, a living testament to decades of summers, storms, and celebrations. I had grown up playing under its branches, carved initials into its bark as a teenager, and countless neighbors had picnicked in its shade. And now, Karen, the HOA tyrant, had decided it belonged to her drama. I ran toward her, voice cracking, shouting, "Stop! That's a century-old oak." But she waved me off, the chainsaw revving in a horrifying hum. Her friends, who had come along for moral support, giggled nervously, standing back as if this was some kind of harmless spectacle. The lawn glistened with dew, and I could see my own reflection in the nearby windows. Shock, disbelief, and a surge of anger coursing through me. Before I could react further, the chainsaw bit into the trunk. A chunk of bark flew at my feet, a warning that this wasn't just posturing, she was serious. I dialed 911, my hands trembling, my mind racing. Who even does this? Who has the audacity to destroy something irreplaceable just because they feel entitled? The operator's calm voice barely penetrated my panic as I explained the situation: a 100-year-old oak, an illegal cutting, potential danger to property, neighbors watching, and a chainsaw-wielding Karen laughing like she owned the world. And then it happened. The tree groaned, a deep, resonant sound that seemed almost alive. The ground trembled beneath it as Karen pushed harder, the angle of the cut precise but reckless. My heart hammered, and I sprinted toward the house, hoping anyone could stop the inevitable. In a twist of fate, the old sheriff, who lived next door, stepped out for his morning coffee. He stopped dead in his tracks, eyes widening in disbelief, as the massive oak began its final descent. Karen froze for a split second, confusion flickering across her smug face, realizing too late that her reckless act had consequences far beyond her imagination. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that presses against your chest, and I knew whatever happened next would be unforgettable. The tree was coming down, and there was no turning back. Time slowed as the tree creaked and groaned, massive branches swaying dangerously. The sheriff's eyes widened, his hand instinctively shielding his chest as he realized the trajectory of the fall. Karen's grin faltered. Her friends screamed, some ducking behind garden furniture, others frozen in place, unable to comprehend the disaster unfolding in slow motion. I ran closer, my heart pounding. "Move back. It's going to hit the house," I shouted, but adrenaline made my voice almost disappear into the roar of splitting wood. The ground vibrated under my feet as the massive trunk began its terrifying descent. Dust and splinters exploded around the base of the tree. Karen scrambled backward, chainsaw still running, her smugness replaced with panic. The operator of the HOA's clipboard, previously documenting the audacity of this act, now cowered behind a shrub, eyes wide, jaw slack. There was no plan for what was about to happen, no exit strategy, just chaos waiting to claim its mark. The sheriff's house, a charming, modest structure, stood directly in the path of the falling oak. Windows rattled, siding cracked, and for a brief, horrifying moment, time seemed suspended. Neighbors emerged from behind fences, phones out, capturing the disaster for posterity, unsure if anyone would survive the imminent impact. Then impact. The trunk slammed into the roof with a sickening crash, splintering wood and sending shards flying in all directions. Karen screamed, stumbling backward as the chainsaw clattered to the ground, powerless. Her friends shrieked, ducking, some grabbing each other for protection. The house shuddered, groaned, and then came to a jagged halt as the massive tree pinwheeled against the ground. Silence fell, heavy and tense. Dust settled, punctuated only by Karen's panicked breathing and the occasional crack of wood under stress. The sheriff, miraculously unharmed, stood on the porch, staring at the destruction in disbelief. His coffee cup dropped, shattering on the steps, but he remained upright, a testament to his quick reflexes and perhaps luck. Neighbors whispered and pointed, some laughing nervously, others horrified. The oak, once a symbol of stability and history, now lay across the roof, branches splayed like frozen fingers. Karen stared at the devastation, realizing for the first time that her actions had consequences far beyond petty HOA authority. I approached cautiously, surveying the damage. The sheriff's house was battered, but no one was hurt thankfully. Karen's smug confidence had crumbled entirely, replaced with shock, fear, and a dawning awareness of her recklessness. This wasn't going to end with an apology. Legal consequences, insurance claims, and neighborhood fury were about to collide in one unstoppable storm. The lesson was clear: entitlement has a price, and some mistakes, especially involving century-old oaks, cannot be undone. Karen's face had turned pale, eyes wide as the reality of her reckless act settled in. She stumbled backward, clutching at her friends for support, her hands shaking. The chainsaw lay abandoned, still warm, a stark reminder of her audacity. Her carefully cultivated aura of control and superiority evaporated in an instant. The sheriff stepped forward, surveying the damage with a mixture of disbelief and measured calm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the fury simmering beneath. Karen's friends nodded frantically, murmuring apologies. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing no words could undo what had just happened. I approached slowly, taking in the scale of destruction. The massive oak sprawled across the roof, branches gouging the siding and crushing part of the porch. Leaves and splintered wood littered the lawn. Dust hung in the air, caught in the morning sun, a surreal haze over the suburban disaster. The neighborhood had gathered, whispers and gasps punctuating the tense quiet. One neighbor, an elderly woman clutching her cane, muttered, "I've lived here 50 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Karen's bravado was gone. Her HOA authority, her smug enforcement of petty rules, meant nothing here. A century-old oak had humbled her in seconds, and the entire block had witnessed it. The sheriff inspected the house cautiously, checking structural integrity, ensuring no one was injured. Miraculously, the main living area remained intact, though the roof caved in under the tree's weight. The sound of splintering wood and the occasional creak of stressed beams filled the air. Karen's friends winced at each noise, finally grasping the severity of the situation. Karen tried to speak again, fumbling for excuses, but the sheriff raised a hand. "Save it. The damage speaks for itself." Karen froze, her mind racing. Legal consequences, insurance claims, and community outrage were suddenly very real. No HOA meeting, no petty fines, no intimidation could erase the chaos she'd caused. I stepped closer to her, keeping my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about revenge. It's about consequences." Karen's eyes flickered between me, the sheriff, and her own demolished plans for control. For the first time, humility, or at least shock, softened her expression. Neighbors whispered, some snapping photos, others shaking their heads. The event had become instant legend: HOA Karen versus the 100-year-old oak. Karen's power, carefully cultivated over years, had collided with natural authority, and the result was undeniable. The lesson was seared into the scene: arrogance has limits, and nature even in suburban neighborhoods will not be ignored. Karen's morning of bravado had turned into a historic miscalculation that no amount of HOA influence could reverse. Karen finally found her voice, trembling and high-pitched. I didn't think it would," she stammered, eyes darting between the splintered oak and the sheriff surveying the damage. Her friends murmured apologies, sheepishly echoing her disbelief. The bravado she wore like armor on neighborhood streets had vanished completely. The sheriff's expression hardened slightly, a mixture of frustration and incredulity. "You cut down a protected tree without authorization," he said firmly. "It's not just the HOA rules you broke, it's the law. And now you've damaged private property." Karen's face went white as the words sank in. This wasn't a polite warning or a minor fine. This was serious, and the consequences were about to follow. I took a deep breath, letting the tension build naturally. Karen had spent years enforcing trivial rules, wielding HOA authority like a weapon. But the universe had delivered a reckoning she couldn't manipulate. The oak had fallen in perfect alignment with her ego, crushing both the sheriff's house and any illusion of control she had left. Neighbors had gathered along fences and driveways, phones recording every moment. Some whispered in shock, others chuckled nervously at the poetic justice of the situation. Karen's face alternated between disbelief and panic, while her friends huddled together, realizing how dangerous their morning joyride into destruction had become. The sheriff walked slowly around the house, checking structural integrity and making mental notes for reports. His calm professionalism contrasted starkly with Karen's rising hysteria. Every creak of the stressed wood, every crack in the siding, emphasized the gravity of her reckless act. This wasn't a prank, a petty HOA battle, or a misunderstood permission slip. This was real. Karen's friends finally spoke up, voicing hesitant, stammered apologies. Karen remained silent for a long beat, her mind racing for excuses or explanations. None existed. The oak didn't discriminate between intention and arrogance, it simply did what centuries of growth and physics demanded. I stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "This isn't about shaming you," I said. "It's about accountability. Nature has rules, property has rules, and you ignored both." Karen flinched, realizing that the power she wielded casually over neighbors had no effect here. Authority had a different face, one she could not bend, ignore, or manipulate. The air was heavy with tension, dust, and splintered wood. The neighborhood watched silently, absorbing the lesson as much as Karen did. The oak, once a symbol of life and stability, now lay across the house, a reminder that arrogance can bring consequences faster than anyone expects. As Karen finally lowered her gaze, a flicker of humility mixed with fear crossed her features. She was learning, slowly and painfully, that actions have consequences that no HOA rule can shield you from. The sheriff finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with authority. "I'll need a full report, including witnesses. This damage isn't minor, and the law doesn't favor reckless behavior." Karen's shoulders slumped, her usual composure replaced with dread. She realized this wasn't a simple HOA complaint, this was a legal and financial nightmare. Neighbors edged closer, curiosity mingling with shock. Some whispered about the irony of the situation. The woman who spent years enforcing petty rules now faced the consequences of extreme recklessness. Karen's friends looked guilty, their previous amusement replaced with anxious regret. Every splinter of wood, every fallen branch told a story she couldn't rewrite. I walked to the base of the massive oak, running my fingers over the jagged cuts, the scars of centuries-old wood now torn and broken. The chainsaw lay discarded nearby, its metallic shine dulled by dust and splinters. Karen glanced at it, realizing the tool she wielded so confidently had become the instrument of her undoing. The sheriff inspected the structural damage carefully, checking for stability. Miraculously, no one had been hurt, but the roof caved in slightly, siding splintered, and windows cracked. Karen's friends whispered nervously, clearly grasping the gravity of the moment. Even the casual observers felt the tension. The lesson in accountability was palpable. Karen attempted to speak, fumbling for excuses. I didn't know it would," she began, but the sheriff held up a hand. "Save it. What matters now is resolving the damage and ensuring no one is hurt." Her face paled as she realized no charm, no manipulation, and no HOA authority could undo this chaos. I stood nearby, letting her process the moment. Years of petty dominance over neighbors, endless complaints and fines, had given her a false sense of control. Today, nature and consequence had reminded her that some authority is absolute and unbending. Arrogance had met reality and reality had won. Neighbors whispered, some snapping photos, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's ego, carefully curated for years, lay shattered like the splintered oak across the roof. Her friends avoided eye contact, silently acknowledging their complicity in the chaos. The morning had begun with casual disregard for rules and ended with a dramatic lesson in humility. I finally addressed Karen directly, calm but firm. You're lucky no one was hurt. This could have been far worse. Her hands shook, and her eyes flickered between the damaged house, the fallen tree, and the gathering crowd. She now understood, the consequences of recklessness extend far beyond what anyone can imagine. The oak, massive and immovable even in death, had spoken. Karen had learned a lesson she would never forget. Karen's friends quietly helped assess the scene, carefully stepping around splintered wood and fallen branches. Their earlier laughter had evaporated, replaced with nervous glances and whispered apologies. Even they could see the magnitude of the mistake, the sheer scale of the destruction, and the consequences that Karen now faced. The sheriff, calm but firm, took control of the situation. He measured the damage, documented the structural impact on his home, and noted the potential costs of repairs. Each branch that had crushed the porch or siding was evidence of negligence, and Karen's smug authority was now completely irrelevant. Her HOA status, her previous power plays, they meant nothing here. I observed silently, noting Karen's body language. Arms crossed defensively, lips pressed tight, eyes darting as if looking for an escape or an excuse. But there was none. Her arrogance, carefully built over years of neighborhood domination, had collided with consequences that could not be negotiated away. The oak tree, centuries old, had become the ultimate teacher. Neighbors gathered, some taking photos or videos, others whispering about the poetic justice. She's always so controlling, one murmured, and now this. Karen's friends whispered apologies again, this time directly to her, understanding the weight of what had occurred. Karen herself remained silent, absorbing every detail, her face pale with shock and dawning comprehension. The sheriff addressed Karen, his voice firm yet measured. Cutting down a protected tree without authorization is a serious violation. Not only do you owe restitution for property damage, but legal action could follow. This isn't a matter of HOA authority, it's a legal and financial issue. Karen flinched, realizing the full scope of the repercussions. I stepped forward, my tone calm but unwavering. This isn't about humiliation or revenge. It's about accountability. Your actions had consequences that could have been far worse. Lucky for everyone, no one was injured. Karen's gaze flickered between me, the destroyed porch, and her own hands, shaking with realization. The fallen oak loomed above, massive, immovable, a stark symbol of how arrogance and entitlement can collide with reality. Karen's power had been stripped, replaced with the humbling force of consequence. For the first time, she truly understood that some authority cannot be bent, manipulated, or avoided. Her friends finally nodded, acknowledging responsibility, while Karen remained frozen, staring at the tree. The neighborhood watched, absorbed in the drama, witnessing a lesson that would be remembered for years. The oak had delivered justice without malice, teaching respect, caution, and humility in a single, unforgettable moment. The morning had begun with arrogance, chainsaws, and chaos. It ended with shattered wood, stunned witnesses, and a clear reminder, nature and consequence always win. Karen finally spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't think it would, she began, but the words faltered in her throat. Her friends murmured apologies, guilt etched on their faces. The morning's chaos had shattered her confidence, leaving her powerless and exposed in front of the entire neighborhood. The sheriff stepped forward, surveying the damage with a critical eye. "This isn't a trivial matter," he said. "You destroyed property and violated regulations. There will be legal and financial consequences." Karen's eyes widened. For the first time, she realized that her HOA authority, the intimidation she relied on for years, could not protect her from actual law and order. I stayed close, observing her reaction. Her posture had changed, shoulders slumped, hands fidgeting, eyes darting nervously. The arrogance she carried like armor had evaporated, replaced by an uneasy acknowledgement that her decisions had consequences beyond petty rules. This wasn't just a lesson in etiquette, it was a lesson in accountability, humility, and the limits of control. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some pointing their phones at the destruction, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's friends quietly helped survey the damage, careful not to make the situation worse. The oak tree lay like a giant sentinel across the sheriff's porch and roof, branches sprawled and jagged, a stark symbol of natural justice. Karen tried to interject, offering excuses, but the sheriff raised a hand. "No excuses," he said. "Your actions have created a serious situation. You will cooperate fully in restitution and any necessary legal proceedings." Her face paled, realizing that charm and manipulation had no effect here. Authority, when paired with law and responsibility, demanded respect. I spoke directly to Karen, calm but firm. "You had the chance to prevent this. Instead, you chose recklessness. Today, the consequences caught up with you." She flinched, the reality of her choices settling in. Her friends looked at her silently, knowing they had been part of the chain reaction that led to this disaster. The oak, centuries old, had left a mark not only on the sheriff's house but also on Karen's ego. It was a living lesson: disregard for rules and nature comes with immediate repercussions. Her arrogance had met immovable reality, and it had lost spectacularly. Dust hung in the air, neighbors held their breath, and Karen finally seemed to comprehend the enormity of her mistake. This day would be remembered, discussed, and retold not as a trivial HOA story but as a vivid lesson in recklessness, accountability, and the consequences of ignoring authority and common sense. Karen's friends quietly helped survey the damage, their earlier amusement replaced by guilt and fear. Each branch, splintered siding, and shattered window served as evidence of the morning's recklessness. The oak had become a teacher, and the lesson was harsh, unforgettable, and impossible to ignore. The sheriff, still calm and methodical, took notes and photographs, documenting every cracked board, dented gutter, and displaced shingle. "You need to understand the severity," he said, addressing Karen. "This isn't just property damage. You violated regulations, and there are financial and legal consequences waiting." Karen flinched, realizing her petty HOA authority was meaningless here. I stepped closer, keeping my tone steady. "This could have gone far worse. Luck isn't always on your side. Today, it was. But that doesn't erase the irresponsibility." Karen's gaze dropped to the ground. Her arms, once crossed confidently, now hung limply. She understood that nothing could shield her from the consequences of blatant recklessness. Neighbors lingered, watching in a mixture of shock and fascination. Some whispered about the irony: Karen, who had bullied and controlled for years, now powerless under the weight of her own actions. Her friends avoided eye contact, quietly acknowledging their role in the chaos. The lesson was universal: entitlement meets consequences, and it loses. Karen finally muttered a reluctant apology, though it sounded hollow even to her ears. I didn't think it would cause this much damage." Her voice cracked, revealing both fear and dawning humility. There was no defense, no charm, no HOA regulation that could erase the impact of her choices. I surveyed the fallen oak, massive and imposing despite its end. The branches spread across the sheriff's roof and porch, a silent monument to accountability. Karen's arrogance had met something stronger than bylaws or intimidation: reality, immovable and inescapable. Her morning of ego-driven destruction had turned into a cautionary tale for everyone watching. The sheriff finally turned to us, voice firm but composed. "We'll handle the repair and legal process. You'll need to cooperate fully. This is not optional." Karen nodded, pale and shaken. For the first time, she was faced with authority she could neither manipulate nor escape. As the dust settled, a quiet stillness enveloped the neighborhood. The oak tree, destroyed yet majestic, had changed everything. Karen had learned humility the hard way, her friends had learned complicity has consequences, and the community had witnessed a moment they would remember for decades. The aftermath was surreal. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional crunch of wood underfoot and the hushed whispers of onlookers. Karen stood near the base of the fallen oak, her face pale, arms hanging limply, as if the weight of her actions physically pressed on her. Her friends hovered nearby, anxious and remorseful, fully aware that this morning's chaos had changed everything. The sheriff, surveying the damage for a final time, spoke with measured authority. "The house is damaged, the tree is gone, and you need to understand the consequences of your choices. There are fines, restitution, and potential legal action. You cannot ignore this." Karen's expression shifted from shock to comprehension. The reality of her recklessness could not be spun or avoided. I stepped forward, calm but firm. "You had power over neighbors, petty rules, and authority within the HOA. None of that matters here. What matters is responsibility, accountability, and understanding the limits of control." Karen swallowed hard, nodding slightly. For the first time, she grasped the true weight of her arrogance. Neighbors continued to gather, some taking photos, others simply staring in disbelief. This wasn't gossip, it was a lesson in accountability and natural consequence, one that would be discussed for years. Karen's friends, usually amused by her antics, were silent, reflecting on how quickly fun and bravado can turn into disaster. The oak tree lay across the sheriff's porch and roof, a stark monument to nature's authority and human error. Even in its destruction, it commanded respect, a reminder that arrogance cannot stand against force and consequence. Karen's usual superiority, built on HOA intimidation, had crumbled under the weight of reality. Karen finally spoke, voice low, hesitant. I understand. I won't. I can't," she trailed off, realizing that no words could undo the damage. Her ego, once inflated by neighborhood control, had deflated completely, replaced by humility and a dawning understanding of responsibility. The sheriff nodded, satisfied that no one was hurt and that the lesson had landed, but the consequences were far from over. Insurance claims, repair costs, and legal accountability would follow, and Karen would have to face every detail. This was not a simple apology scenario, it was life-altering accountability. As the sun reflected off the scattered leaves and splintered wood, I looked at Karen one last time. The day had been a harsh teacher, but the lesson was clear: entitlement has limits, nature has authority, and recklessness carries consequences. The oak was gone, the damage evident, and Karen was changed, her arrogance replaced with humility, her confidence tempered by reality. This was a day the neighborhood would never forget, a story to retell, a cautionary tale for anyone tempted to ignore rules, respect, and consequence.